I wanted to be able to chart my own path, my own journey, my own destiny. I wanted to be able to say yes when I wanted to say yes without having to ask permission. I wanted to be able to say no without having to ask permission. And so, people think that, oh, you're in the sweet, sweet, you can sort of chart your own path. It's not like that. Everybody's got a boss. Even the CEO has a board of directors. And so, I loved what I was doing. I loved, the job that I was in, the role that I was making, in the impact that I was making. But I felt that there was more, and I wanted to continue to grow.
Welcome to Women in Work, the show where we take an inside look at how women are overcoming our own unique challenges as we grow our careers or build a business while nurturing relationships and family. I'm Diane Mocha, founder and CEO of MomSub, the childcare app that connects you to a substitute mom. And I want you to know that work can fit your life. Each week, we meet a woman who has done that. And today, I'm with Celeste Warren. She is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who left corporate to start her own company. She began her career in HR and spent nearly 3 decades working her way up to executive positions, devoting 15 years to a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company where she served as vice president and chief diversity and inclusion officer. More recently, she teamed up with her two grown children to launch a nonprofit organization providing resources to students of color pursuing degrees in STEM-related fields. All right, thank you for being here, Celeste.
Thank you for the invitation.
I see you worked in industries that did not traditionally have a lot of representation of women and people of color, and you took on positions to address that from within, and now as founder of Celeste Warren Consulting. So we know that's not an easy road, especially in light of the direction of the country under the current White House administration. So I want to talk about some of the hurdles that you faced and ask you to start with, what do you think has been the biggest challenge in your career, specifically because you are a woman?
Oh gosh, I can remember when I got started, and I was with a company. I just left grad school, and I had was working in White Plains, New York, and I was working on a project, and I was so proud of it because it was my first project that I had worked on by myself. I think I'd been probably 2 or 3 years in the in the corporate world. And so I had worked on it, and I was presenting it to a group of about 5 men, all men, and one was my boss. And so I presented it, and this was something that was probably six to 9 month project that I saw from start to beginning. Presented it, and the group sat there quietly, and then I said, "Are there any questions?" Then they proceeded to ask questions directed towards my boss and not towards me. And he hadn't worked on the project at all. He was just sort of overseeing it. And, I'd come to him if I ran into any roadblocks or anything like that. And so we had a great relationship, my boss and me. He was a good first, boss and everything for the most part. But then when this happened, instead of him kicking the questions back over to me and saying, well, Celeste worked on this project, why don't you direct your questions to her? He answered them. And so
Like he
I
was taking
felt,
credit.
well, it was, and I'll tell you why, he said, because I confronted him afterwards. But I felt so marginalized. I felt so unimportant. I felt just really, really just devalued. And so when the meeting was over, um, he saw that I was not happy and I was upset. And he was like, I'm sorry. I thought that was a rousing success. They liked your project. They're going to move forward with it. We got the funding, this and that, blah, 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 blah. And he said, well, what's wrong? And I said, what's wrong is they had questions. And instead of you telling them to ask me, you answered them. And he thought that by answering the questions, he thought that he was supporting me. And so I said, well, it didn't come across that way. It came across that I didn't have command of the project. And so we had a good discussion about it because it was a learning moment for him too. And I told him how I felt. I told him the impact that it had on me, how it made me feel small in the room. And he apologized and he said it will never happen again. And it didn't. It didn't happen again. And so he was just one of those people who was just he was very energetic and I don't know a way to describe him. Passionate is the way they might say it, but he was just sort of, energetic and just thought, well, I'm going to be over supportive of her and everything. And so when I told him how I felt, he was, I mean, you could just see it. He was just deflated. And so it was a good conversation and it helped to move our relationship along. But that was the first sort of instance coming into corporate America that I said, okay, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm an advocate for myself because, even this person who had the best intentions, they can't advocate for me in the way that I feel I need to be advocated for. And so that was a lesson for me, especially being a woman in the workforce and a woman of color as well.
That is one of the best stories I've heard after more than 70 interviews because so many of the stories that women tell me when I always start out with this question, end up with, them leaving or coming
Mm,
up against a wall that, the men saying, you'll never be promoted to that position. It doesn't matter how hard you work because, you're a woman. I mean, like literally so many things. And it's doesn't surprise me that you went into this specialty of diversity, equity, and inclusion because you saw right then and there the actual impact on your life and the organization itself because I'm sure others saw a change in him as well. So what I want to know is early in your career when you were young, you may have had confidence, and you may have known, all of these things, but so many women didn't have the
mhm,
chutzpah at that point in their life, in their career. They were too scared to say what they thought. Not
mhm,
only did you say what you thought, but you didn't even need to like go home, think about it, cry, whatever, put it in writing. I mean, right then and there, you knew this is not right. Here's why it's not right. You had a good relationship, but still share with our listeners what it was about you and
mhm.
how they could get some of that magic ingredient that allowed you to understand, be aware, speak it, not be afraid of the repercussions. Because no matter what your relationship was, you didn't really know how he was going to react.
Yeah.
And how wonderful that he took this in and made an adjustment, that he realized that was not my intention and he wanted to change. But what was it about you and what can other people learn from that?
Oh gosh, yeah, I was very fortunate, Diane. I grew up in a household in small steel mill town, Western Pennsylvania. My father was the first black teacher and first black principal in that area. And so every night that he came home, my siblings and I had a front row seat hearing about the obstacles and the barriers that he had to go through as the first and the only. And when my mom would say, like normal wives do, hey, honey, how was your day? At the dinner table, we heard about the struggles that he faced, but we didn't hear just about the struggles. We heard about what he did to overcome them. And so that was ingrained in me as a child growing up that there were going to be struggles, there were going to be times when the world didn't seem fair. But as a black woman in the world, you can't you can't let it stop you. You can't just stand still. You have to keep moving forward. You have to find a way to be able to continue to progress and thrive in any environment that you're in. And that was just ingrained in me throughout my young adult life and all the way up through. So um, I think the reason why I reacted in that way was because that was number one, I was in my 20s. um, it was my second career. I like yourself, I used to be a reporter too, just for a short period of time, and switched careers, went back to grad school, and then ended up in human resources. And throughout that time of learning and growing, it just added on to the principles and the foundation that my parents instilled in me about making sure that you speak for yourself, you elevate your voice, because in this world that we're in, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. That was what was ingrained in me and others in that generation as well, in my generation as well, from our parents. You have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And I grew up believing that and understanding that, also knowing that it wasn't fair and equitable, but knowing that that's how I had to operate.
So it's interesting because there's people who still believe, that diversity, equity, inclusion means special treatment.
Yeah.
But really, all you were asking your boss and all you're probably doing in your consulting is, like you said, have a fair playing field so that these people who are, other, women, people of color, do not have to work twice as hard for half as much, which I still hear women saying. I
Mhm.
always have to prove myself, or they feel as if they have to prove themselves. How do you know when it's not just, I feel that, I'm sensitive, when it's actually true? Did you, see instances where there were situations where you weren't getting what somebody else would have? In other words, if that was a man who had done that presentation, who was young and in his 20s, would his boss have done the same thing if it was a white man who was up there?
Mhm.
How would you know that? And how do you explain to others that there is a difference in how I was treated than how I would have been if it was a white man up there who was explaining his project?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go more than just gut feeling, and your gut feeling is important. But I'll just, as a human resources business partner, I've had many situations where I've had to mediate these types of situations too, where I can remember there was a gentleman who was in the sales force, and he was saying he was a manager, and he said, "Well, I don't think my female sales rep is working as hard as the others." And so then I would ask, well, what makes you think that? And when you ask the five whys, so you just keep asking why, and then playing back what you're hearing. What you end up is the truth. And sometimes it's a biased truth. And then that's where the coaching and the counseling comes in. That's where I start having the conversation about, okay, let's tap into this. Let's talk about the what you just said. And in this particular case, it was because she didn't have the timeline during the day, working timeline that he did. So, she basically, got her kids off to school,
I knew it.
went and worked,
I
right?
figured it was she was leaving early or arriving late, but then making up
Yes.
for it later. Go ahead. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
yes, that's exactly it, and then she would finish up, not finish up, but she would pause when they came home from school, and then as soon as she fed them and they were, doing their homework and all of that, she got back online and continued working until bedtime. She put them to bed, and then she continued working. Women, we have that sort of, okay, I know what I need to get done, and I know how I need to integrate work and life, and I know, the output of what my priorities are, and I will make sure that they're done while I still take care of my family. And so we had this discussion. I had this discussion with this manager, and I said, "Okay, tell me what it is." And so he then, started talking about how I think she's not working as hard as she should be. And I said, "Well, what's the output? What do her numbers look like?" Because this was in the sales division. What do her numbers look like? Have you talked to her customers? What is the data that shows that this is happening, that she's not producing that she should? And this was, grocery sales. And so um, he couldn't answer the question. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's pull up her data, and let's take a look at it. Let's look at her numbers. Let's look at the performance information. He pulls it up, and he's like, oh, well, this might be a little low, or this might be a little. I said, okay, well, now let's pull up the other sales reps in your region. He starts pulling up, the other information, and she's comparable to everybody else. And then in some places, she's higher in her output. So that went from a could have gone wrong type conversation to basically kind of saying, why, why, why? And then getting down to show me the data that supports this accusation that you have, and let's explore it. But just think if he had approached her with this. He hadn't approached her yet. As I was the HR business partner, he was coming to me first. And I made sure that he didn't approach, because his accusations weren't correct. And they weren't based in anything except for the fact that she didn't have the same working style that he did. And so diversity comes in all kinds of shapes and forms and dimensions and everything else. This in this particular case, it was she's a woman, she works differently than you do. She works at different times than you do. So you have to accept this and look at the output of her work and her performance, not at what she's doing from hour 1 to hour 2 to hour 3 to hour 4. So that was another learning moment. But I've had the opportunity, thankfully, to be able to interject throughout my career to try to make sure that these things don't happen. And so having those been trained in that way, so like from a child and then as a human resources professional, when I feel that there's been some um, um, inequity in my career, I'm able to speak up for it because I know what to look for. And I know basically, but I know that there are people who don't have the same advantages that I did of being able to look at different things, being trained in how to spot out inequities, being trained in how to coach and counsel managers, etc. They haven't had that, and they're sitting there in this environment where they feel like I'm a victim. I don't have an avenue by which to be able to say, here's what's happening. And it's so sad. And that's why I wanted to spend my career being able to help people who feel that they can't elevate their voices.
And you had that foundation growing up that gave you, the tools and the direction to do that. So I am a huge advocate of, like I said at the beginning of the show, making work fit your life. And especially for women, this is hugely impactful because it can reduce, that stress and guilt that comes with trying to balance everything. Women are trying to be the top in their career and the top mom. And there are ways to do it. You can't do everything perfect all of the time, but you can flow and adjust. But sometimes you run into a rigid world. And so in running my businesses, am hugely supportive of you figure out the schedule that works for you. You can flex your hours up and down. You can work in office or not. These are things that need to be done. How do we get these things done? And I dream of a day when most companies, I know there's certain things that can't be like that. You're a surgeon, you need to be there when the person is ready for surgery, and you need to stay until it's done.
Yes,
But
yes.
there are many, many jobs that have the ability to have this flex. And we saw this during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And then we moved back in this direction. I've seen articles that say, oh, there's statistics that show people aren't as productive at home as they are. It depends on the person, their working style, all of that. How do we as a society, corporate America, where we are in the work world, move towards that direction to make the bosses, the owners, understand that this can be a benefit to not
Hmm.
just the employee, but the organization. And how do you do that on a larger scale? You're doing it one person, one company at a time. But what can we, as a community of women
Hmm.
do? Because I just see so many posts on LinkedIn and I feel like it's just, preaching to the choir. We all know
Hmm.
this, the people who are seeing all these posts, but the rest of the nation isn't really understanding or on board. And what can we do?
Well, first of all, we can advocate for ourselves and others as well. In organizations, there are policies, practices, procedures, etc. And one thing you can do is first just like be aware of the policies that exist. I can tell you time and time again where a lot of women aren't even aware of the advantages and the benefits and things that are offered by their company. Well, number one, their manager doesn't tell them about it. They don't advertise it. And so you have to go in and you have to look at those policies yourself. Okay, what are some flexible work arrangements that are part of the policy? What are my opportunities or things around pay equity? What are the things that I can bring up to my manager? And usually there's anything that you can bring up to your manager. But first of all, knowing sort of the lay of the land of the organization is really, really important. Another thing too is there's power in numbers. I always advocate for employee resource groups. I think those are powerful entities, and usually the women's employee resource groups are always the largest in every company that I've ever worked with or worked at. The women's employee resource groups are always the largest by far. And so being a part of a larger entity that can work together and really move organizations towards more fair and equitable practices and equal opportunity for everyone is really, really powerful. You can have those conversations with your managers because you're not just having it for yourself, you're having it for your peers as well. And then that manager, it's sort of like a ripple effect. You have that conversation with that manager, your team then benefits from it, and then that manager demonstrates it with their peers, and then those teammates on those teams benefit from it as well. So I'll never forget an email I got from a young employee, and she said, Celeste, she goes, I'm not a people manager. I'm not a supervisor. I'm just someone who is sitting in XYZ country. And I don't know. Um, she had a suggestion. That's what it was. She had a suggestion. And, and I said, this is a really good idea. Have you shared it with your manager? And she said, well, no, I don't think, I don't think they'd be interested. They don't really pay attention to me, this and that, blah, blah, blah. And so through a series of conversations, I really, encouraged her to have the conversation. And she did. And it led to this, not just her being able to have a suggestion or an idea, but it turned into this project, huge project that helped to bring in, I can't even tell you so much revenue in that country. And so here was one person, one idea who felt I don't matter to being able to have that conversation. So, and then she joined her women's ERG after that, and really became part of this powerful community of people who were changing things together. And I just believe that one person can change the world, but and then there's power in numbers as well.
Did she get a promotion or a raise, I hope?
She definitely got a promotion. It catapulted her career.
Nice, nice. So let's talk about you specifically.
Uh-huh.
You have children. So
I
you've had
do.
that point in life where you're pregnant, you're thinking about, okay, what's the future? No one ever asks a man, like, what are you going to do after the kids come along? Are you going to keep working? But they all ask women, right? So, were there thoughts of cutting back, changing careers? Were you gung ho? I'm going to, be the full-time working mom. I'm going to balance all this. And what kinds of policies did you look into and find in your
Mhm.
own organization? Were you a big advocate to understand, like, oh, we have this, but we don't have that. Maybe I can negotiate this. How did you manage when kids came along and you suddenly had to balance being a mom and an ambitious career woman?
Oh yeah. I remember it very, very closely when I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter. And um something you just changed. You know, they say marriage changes you. Marriage changes you somewhat. Children really change you. And I can remember having when I came back to work, so I think I took 2 months and came back to work and I sat down with my then manager and I said, look, I I want to be home with my daughter as much as I can, but I still know that I can contribute to this organization as well. So this is what I would like. I looked at our flexible work arrangement. Um, it was the policy was very at that time. It wasn't really clear. It was kind of vague, and there were a lot of other rewrites after that because we're talking 25 years ago. And I said, here's what I would like. I would like to be able to work from home on Fridays because back then that was unheard of. I would like to work from home on Fridays, and I would also like to make sure that I want to be home by a certain period of time. I don't want to be working late. Um, and what I commit to you, though, is that I will still get what I need to get done when it needs to be done in the quality that it needs to be done. And so it was a contracting, I guess you will, with my manager at the time when I got back. And I mean, it was day one. As soon as I came back into the workforce, all of this stuff was just being thrown at me and everything. And and I just basically sat down with him. And I said, the number one thing in my life now is my daughter. And I want to make sure that I'm there for her when I need to be there for her. And I will commit to you that I'm not going to be slack in my work. That's not going to happen. And I didn't. And he
You got
laughed
what
and
you
he
asked for?
I did.
You
I
did.
did. And at first it was like a trial basis, right? Trial and all right, let's see how this works. That was his comment. Let's see how this works. And um a few months later, I sat down with him during one of our one-on-ones and I said, how's it working? You said, we would try it for a few months. How do you feel it's working? Have I missed anything? Have I missed any deadlines? Is there anything? And I knew the answer to all these questions. Have I missed any deadlines? Is there anything that didn't get done that was supposed to get done in the quality of work that that you had become accustomed to with me? And he sat back and he said, Celeste, you haven't missed any deadline. It's still the same quality of work. And he said, come to think about it, you seem to be getting more done than you were before, and that's not even possible. I never thought that'd be possible because I had high standards for myself. It wasn't like I was competing with anybody else. That's not how I thought. My competition was with myself. How can I do better? How can I this? How can I that? How can I raise the bar on myself? And so this was something that was going on an inward battle with myself. I do want it all. I want to be the mom. I want to be the career woman, and I'm going to do it. And that's all there is to it. And luckily, I had a boss who I could prove that to, and he supported me once I proved it, right?
Mhm. I love this because this is a theme that I repeat over and over. I'm a huge advocate of women asking for what you want. It doesn't
Yeah.
guarantee you're going to get it. It happened to me actually as a joke. I was working as a reporter 5 days a week, and I took time off after I had my child. I just told the station I wasn't coming back. And after 6 months, I went and I thought, oh, I'll just spend a few years at home, with my
Uh-huh.
child, and then I'll go back later. I think I was a little naive, because it would have been really tough, and I was missing it. So I went back at 6 months just to bring my baby up, and like everyone
Mm.
can ooh and ah, everyone in the station crowds around, and my managing editor said, "We really miss you. We'd love to have you back." And I said, "I really
Mm.
miss reporting, and it would be great to come back, but ha ha ha, I would only do it, like 1 or 2 days a week." Because to me, in my mind, like that would be perfect, but that's nobody would agree to that. I had been working 5 days,
And
and
how long ago was this, Diane?
this was in 2001.
Okay.
So about
Okay.
25
Yep.
years ago.
Yep.
And he looked at me and he said, "I think we could arrange that just like that." And I was floored. And that is a moment that stuck with me. And I have told this story over and over because I tell women, just ask for what you want. I said it
Yeah.
out loud as a joke, and it defined the next 15 years of my life. It was so perfect for me. Everyone's situation of what they want and need is different, and it may change. And I
Yeah.
say, okay, maybe it won't be that simple as just throwing it out there, but think about how much effort you put into a presentation for your company. Put
Yes.
in that much effort for a presentation about what you want, if that's what it takes. Maybe you don't have to do that. Maybe you just sit down and have a conversation, look in the policies and propose something. But if it really took that, what would be wrong with coming up with something that's very formalized that shows the ROI to the
Yes.
company? Because that's the bottom line. If you show that the company is going to be at least the same or better off because what you're doing, then why would they say no? Give them, no reason to say no. So, I want women to ask for what they want. First, figure out what you really want, ask
Hmm.
for it. And then if you find out it's not working, ask for adjustments. Sometimes you think things are going to turn out differently, but most of the time, women really know what they need,
Yes.
to make this work. And you made it work. I made it work. I want to know how you dealt with the childcare piece. Did you just say, okay, I'll put my baby in daycare? That's kind of what everyone does. Or did you try different things? And how easy was it? Did you just find one? They got in. There were no wait lists back then. What was that process like for you?
Well, I was lucky. My husband and I had a conversation when we got married, and it was very interesting. I had just had surgery, and we had just gotten married. I'd had surgery, and I had a myomectomy, and um, and I had to take walks as well as part of my recovery. And we were walking one day and having a conversation about children, and one day wanting children and all of that. And he said, he goes, I really think that for a certain period of time, one of us should be home with the children when we have children. And we started talking about it. And I grew up in a household where my mother was home. My mom didn't work. My dad worked. He grew up in a household where his mother, his father wasn't around. And so his mother worked as well. But there was no one sort of there for him and his brother while his mom was working. And it was tough. And so we were talking about this, and I said, okay. And so I'm kind of looking at him like, okay, what's next, right? And he said, and since you make more money than me, I should probably be the one who's at home during a period of time. Yeah. And so, I kind of looked at him and I thought, wow, okay. So we had had this conversation before we even had kids, as far as the planning and thinking about it. And so, um, when I had the first child, he stopped working, and and he also had the child psychology degree too. So he was, and he was the cook of the family. I can't even boil water. He cooks, and so he decided to stay at home. So he stayed at home. But when I came home from work, it was my turn. I wanted to be with my daughter. I wanted to be with my son. I wanted to be the one because I was still breastfeeding and everything too, and so. Um, that was my time. And so he literally was, I got to have adult conversation, I'm out the door. And he would go and hang out with friends and stuff, and then come back. But that's the decision that we made. But for me, I was very clear with people who worked with me, not just my boss, but people who work with me, peers, my team, everybody. When you come in, make sure you come into my office correct, because don't waste time with me, because I'm going to be ruthless about how I'm protecting my time. Because every time that I'm wasting, every minute that I'm wasting with you, I could be at home with my kids. And so everyone knew that about me. They knew that, okay, when you come and if you're working with Celeste on a project or initiative or this or that, don't waste her time. And that helped things to run a little bit more efficiently and effectively at work. So I could get home and be home, and be home with my kids as well, and give my husband a break. um,
Mhm.
but I was lucky in that way, because we made that decision. We talked about it at length, before we even had kids. We knew we wanted kids, but we just, how do we work all of that out with both of us working?
Mhm.
And I tell you, and I know everyone isn't in that position. We made a lot of sacrifices as far as the budget. We were one, I wasn't making a lot of money back then. And so there were sacrifices that had to be made. There was, the big family vacations that we didn't go on, because this is the life that we chose to live until, I started getting promoted and things like that, and things got a little bit easier for us. But, but yeah, it was a good conversation. It was a powerful time, because I was able to have that conversation. And I'll tell you, it was, Diana, it was different, because I felt so guilty all of the time when I couldn't be there for when my husband took them for their checkup at the doctor, or something would happen at school and I couldn't be the one to go to school and pick up my son or my daughter. And that guilt weighed on me a lot. And it's so funny, because we talked about that too, and it's like, you have to understand that what you're doing is putting food on the table and clothes on our kids' backs, and paying the doctor bills. And we put them in daycare for two days a week for socialization with other kids. And so all of these things, I was helping to make sure that I was providing for, so my family could be safe and secure and have the things that we needed. And so, it was through understanding the role that I played and the role that he played in the upbringing that helped me about it. But I tell you, the night, I'll never forget this as long as I live. It was about, I think my daughter was about 4 months old. And it was my first business trip after coming back from maternity leave. And I cried the whole night. After the meetings were over and I was in my hotel room, I just cried, because it was my first time like traveling away and being away from it. But and I tell you, it was when I came back, it was like I didn't want to let her go. But I was fortunate to have a partner and a husband that we were supportive of each other in that space. I was fortunate that we both grew up in households where, you pinch pennies. Um, my mother, my father, on a teacher's salary with 5 kids. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And my mother made it stretch, and I watched her make that money stretch. And he grew up in the same type of household, so we knew how to stretch dollars. We knew how to budget. We knew how to say, okay, how do we make sure that we make there's not more month than money. And that's very, you not only have to have that foundation in the workplace, but you also have to have that foundation in the home front as well. And it makes things a lot of, yes, there were some horrible, horrible times and hard times. Don't it wasn't all, cakes and flowers and all of that. But when you have that foundation, you can work yourself through it. You can see your way through it.
Yes, we went through the same thing. And that mom guilt is so pervasive. And
Uh-huh.
it's so interesting that you felt it so strongly, despite the fact that you had your children's father caring for them. Like the best next thing to the mother, right, is the father. And you were breastfeeding, so you were probably pumping. And so he was
Yes,
giving them breast milk. They weren't deprived of that. But yet, women who feel this mom guilt and why do I feel this? It's just natural. And you don't
yes.
hear about dad guilt. It's just different. We are different. We have different senses in us about nurturing than
Hmm.
men generally do. And so there's nothing wrong and there's nothing really that you can do other than sort of sit with it, understand it's normal and everyone else is going through it, and like you said, realize the other things that you're contributing and then enjoy the time when you're with them
Yeah.
instead of being stressed out about it. But it's interesting that you say that you sacrificed and you recognize that, but it was important to you. We
Hmm.
went on camping vacations instead of vacations that cost money,
Hmm.
and some of those are some of the best times.
Yeah.
But it's not all, unicorns and rainbows. I mean, having financial challenges, it can be very stressful. But, I know a woman who lost her job and was very distraught. It was, two income household. What am I going to do? She starts looking for work. But in the meantime, over the next month or so, they're making it work. And after a couple months, she realizes we can make this work.
Hmm.
Everything's not going to be the same. And then she stayed home after that. And, everyone needs to find out what's right for them. And for me, it was working part-time, and that definitely led to a lot of financial challenges. And it led to me becoming an entrepreneur because I started a side hustle to bring in more money. But, I think sometimes people out there say, well, things are different now. And I acknowledge it is harder. Wages have not kept up with the cost
Hmm.
of living, but there are still ways to do it. There are, still things when you go through periods where you're unemployed or whatever, you cut out, four streaming services down to one. You find a way. And if it's important to you, when women say, I just wish I could do this, but I can't. I think you and I have lived a life where there was no I can't. There is
Hmm.
how can I find a way? And
Yeah.
is this sacrifice worth it for me to get this, in exchange for that?
Yes.
And I love that you have carved that out throughout your career, but then leaving corporate to
Hmm.
launch a business, that's a big I can because you never know for sure until you do it. So what was the impetus behind that? Why was that so important? You could have kept on the trajectory where you were. You were making an impact. You enjoyed your work, obviously. You were making good money. Why do that? And what has this meant for you now in your life now that you have taken that leap?
Yeah, you reach different stages in your life's journey. And when you're starting out, when you're growing your first managerial roles, and then when you start managing managers, and then when you get in the C-suite. And so this was for me the next leg of my journey, entrepreneurship, because I wanted to be able to spread my wings and see how far they go. I wanted to be able to chart my own path, my own journey, my own destiny. I wanted to be able to say yes when I wanted to say yes without having to ask permission. I wanted to be able to say no without having to ask permission. And so, people think that, oh, you're in the sweet, sweet, you can sort of chart your own path. It's not like that. Everybody's got a boss. Even the CEO has a board of directors. And so, I loved what I was doing. I loved, the job that I was in, the role that I was making, in the impact that I was making. But I felt that there was more, and I wanted to continue to grow. And so I got to a point where I said, what else can I be learning and growing? And this was the natural sort of next chapter. It was, well, you can learn and grow being your own businesswoman. You can learn and grow by um, being a speaker, being, continuing to be an author, continuing to grow as a mom of adult children and watching them and helping them with their careers. And so it was just a natural kind of next step for me in continuing my life's journey and growing and learning. And I started preparing for it because, you can't just leap. I'm not that type of person to just not be thinking about what I'm going to do next. And so, I started planning for it a while back, both from a mindset, from a understanding, entrepreneurship, from a networking standpoint, developing partnerships, and then, financially as well. And so at the point where I felt, okay, I'm ready now. Then I made that leap. And I tell you, it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. It's had its ups and its downs or whatever, but I have enjoyed this leg of the journey, the autonomy, the liberation, the being my own boss. It's just truly, truly wonderful. And um, I had been looking forward to it for, like, the closer I got to it, it wasn't apprehension. It was, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. And it was just it was just wonderful. And like I said, I am still learning. I'm just a year into this, but there's so much that I don't know yet about how to, running a business, scaling a business, etc. And so it's just been wonderful. I launched my second book, and it's just been wonderful, just kind of meeting people like yourself and talking with people and going and traveling to different places and learning and growing and building more colleagues and friends. It's just been wonderful.
Well, congrats to you. With all that you've done, if you could go back to an earlier version of you, knowing then what you know now, what's one thing that you would change?
I think, the one thing that I would change is um, I would have told the younger version me, say, don't be so stressed out about stuff. um, it'll be okay. Things will work out. You don't have to stay up at night worrying about so many different things at such a young age. And things will play. They'll be okay. They'll be okay.
I hear that a lot. That's a common one. Well, thanks so much for all of these insights that you revealed on today's episode of Women and Work. If you were inspired by today's story, remember to share it with a friend, leave a review, and subscribe to meet our next amazing guest. If you or anyone you know is struggling to find the right childcare, just submit your criteria and then watch a video interview with the ideal nanny who fits your family at momsub.com. That's momsub, like a substitute mom. Our mission is for you to get the help you need so you can discover what you want in life, pursue it with intensity, and fulfill your dream, reducing your stress, guilt, and self criticism, and increasing your calm, confidence, and clarity along the way. Remember, your career, your choices, and your success are yours to define. So keep pushing boundaries and spreading your love and encouragement to other women who need it.